Who's actually going to get the most out of a 65-liter heat and cool incubator? And who should walk away before spending the cash? If you're a small to medium research lab that needs to keep cell cultures at a steady 37°C, but also wants the option to dip down to 0°C for enzyme work, this might be a fit. If you're looking for a plug-and-play unit for a single hobbyist experiment, you'll probably end up paying for capacity you'll never use. And is the price justified for a day-to-day user who just needs reliable temperature control? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the basics that matter when you first unpack a benchtop incubator. The Benchmark Scientific Mytemp H2265HC arrives on a pallet. The crate is surprisingly hefty. The whole thing weighs over 200 pounds, so you'll need at least 2 people to get it into your lab space. That weight isn't just shipping bulk. It's the solid metal chassis and the compressor that's built to maintain a sub-zero floor temperature. In practice, that means once you set the temperature, the unit can hold the set point without the kind of hunting you sometimes see on cheaper models. For a lab that runs time-sensitive cell cultures, that stability can translate into fewer lost samples. Now, the heat and cool label sounds fancy, but what does it look like in a real workflow? Imagine you're working on a project that requires growing fibroblasts at 37°C for a week, then quickly cooling the plates to 4°C for a short enzyme digestion step without moving them to a separate fridge. With this incubator, you can program a ramp down, let the internal cooling coil bring the chamber to the lower temperature, and then ramp back up. In user reports, the transition is smooth enough that there's no condensation buildup on the shelves, a problem that can happen if the unit swings too fast between temperatures. That smoothness is a direct result of the powerful compressor Benchmark mentions. It's not a tiny, noisy fan. It's a robust refrigeration system that can actually pull the temperature down to 0°C and hold it. On the flip side, the power draw is something you need to factor into your lab's electrical budget. The unit runs on 230V and pulls a noticeable amount of current, so you'll want a dedicated circuit or be prepared for a possible breaker trip if you're sharing a line with other equipment. In a small teaching lab that runs on a shared panel, that could be a deal breaker. Also, because the compressor is always engaged when you're cooling, the unit can be louder than a simple incubator that only heats. If your incubator sits on a bench next to a microscope station, the low-grade hum may become a distraction during delicate work. One of the hidden trade-offs comes from the size of the chamber. 65L is generous. You can fit a handful of standard 100mm Petri dishes, a few T75 flasks, or even a small rack of microplates. But that space also means you have to be mindful of airflow inside. The Mytemp uses a forced air system, so you'll notice a gentle breeze when the door is open. If your protocol involves very delicate, loosely attached cultures, you might have to add a secondary lid or use a more closed container to avoid drying out. That's a nuance you don't see on the spec sheet, but becomes clear once you start loading the unit with actual samples. Temperature uniformity is another practical point. The internal sensor sits near the middle of the chamber, and Benchmark claims it maintains 0°C when cooling. In practice, users who have logged temperature logs report a variance of about 0.5°C from top to bottom, which is acceptable for most cell culture work, but could be a problem for applications that demand tighter tolerance, like certain enzyme kinetic studies. If your work is that sensitive, you may need to add an auxiliary probe and calibrate it yourself. The unit does have a port for an external sensor, but that adds a small extra step. Let's talk about the user interface. The control panel is a simple dial with an LED readout, no touchscreen, no Wi-Fi, and certainly no app. For a lab that wants a straightforward, no-frills approach, that's a plus. Fewer firmware bugs, no need to manage software updates. However, if you're accustomed to logging temperature data automatically to a cloud service, you'll have to set up a separate data logger. That adds cost and another piece of hardware to maintain. The manual does include a USB port for data export, but it's not plug-and-play. You need to install the driver on a Windows machine and run the software each time you want to report. So, who should walk away from this purchase? If you run a high-throughput core facility that needs a versatile incubator capable of both warming and cooling, and you have the space, the budget for a dedicated circuit, and the willingness to handle a bit of extra data logging setup, the Benchmark Mytemp gives you that.